My name is Denise Karras. I am from St. Louis, Missouri, and I am your host, along with Stan Takis, for this wonderful Church Music Institute, sponsored by the National Forum and the Chicago Metropolis Federation. Stan for all of his incredible work putting this session of our three-part Church Music Institute together. Stan is the choir director. Is it Annunciation, Stan, or Assumption? And where are you, Stan? My brain just froze.
Right
Your
here.
parish.
St. Clair Shores.
Sorry,
St.
St.
Clair Shores, Michigan. Thank you.
That's just north of Grosse Pointe, which is just north of Detroit. So,
Okay. Stan
basically,
is a recipient of the Romanos Medallion from the National Forum of Church Musicians, which is a national award given to people in the area of church music that have had a national impact across the Archdiocese. And Stan is also a recipient of the Athenagoras Award, which is presented by MEFGOX, or the Mid-Eastern Federation of Greek Orthodox Church Musicians, along with the National Forum, for contributions in church music across the Federation of the Mid-Eastern Federation, which is two metropolises, Detroit and Pittsburgh. So welcome, Stan.
Thank you. Christos Anesti, everyone.
Alithos Anesti.
I thought I'd start off today by telling you a little bit about myself for those who don't know me. I'm going to read from a script today because I tend to go off on tangents, and I know we have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to try to not be too stiff, but make sure it keeps me right on script here. So I'm a retired public school teacher. I hold 2 degrees from Michigan State University with studies in history, humanities, and vocal music education. In my career, I taught vocal music, instrumental music, history, social studies, English, dramatics, computers, and I was the school librarian for a few years. I've been involved in Greek Orthodox Church music for 40 years, and for the last 15 years, I have been the choir director at Assumption. And this is the largest parish in the Greek metropolis. Nancy began her involvement in church music 41 years ago as an organist and has been a chanter for over 30 years. She is going to be doing the next 2 workshops, and many of you know her. Today, I'll be looking with you at issues in the Greek Orthodox Church music in America in the coming years after the COVID-19 pandemic. And I approach these issues from the standpoint of a choir director, although I have also had the opportunity of looking at them through a chanter's perspective. I have educated myself as much as I can about the history, theory, and practice of Greek Orthodox Church music. And I do have certain opinions about the issues, but I do not intend to present opinions here. I only want to report to you what I see happening and the possible paths that we might all be able to take in the future. And I will try not to show any bias toward any of those paths. I do not operate out of self-interest, or rather the interest of the health of the entire church. And the Orthodox Church is unique that it considers all of the faithful to be holy, or to use another word, saints. So no one person in the church is the ruler over others. The only ruler we have is Jesus Christ. And if I show my human failings and my biases show, please forgive me and let me know. You may ask questions at any time during the presentation. Just use the raise your hand icon. Denise will tell me there's a question, and then you can turn your microphone on and ask it, or you can ask it in the chat app, and Denise will read it to me. I will either give a short answer immediately, for the situation, or I'll defer the question to the discussion period, which will follow my presentation. to prevent the possibility of going off on tangents. Now, the very first thing I'm going to talk about, though, is a request, it's a question, and it's from our fearless leader, Nick Chimitris. He wanted me to tell him how hymns are authorized. In other words, when someone writes a hymn, how does that become part of the church? And who is the one who approves them? He wanted to know who approved new hymns. And the answer to that is, well, 99% of our hymns have been handed to us from posterity. And we really don't know the specifics of how each hymn got, into the canon, or how they were organized, or who made the decisions. All we know is that they've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so this is the tradition that we have received. Now, in the terms of new saints, believe it or not, they follow the old tradition. And that is to say that somebody writes the hymns, somebody writes the music, and somebody starts celebrating them in the church. And if the majority of the church is celebrating it, then the synod, the patriarch and the synod will maybe formally approve it. But it's not a top-down thing. It's something that comes from the laity and moves its way up to the top, and then they approve it. So that's what I was told by experts in the field. And I believe it, because this is, we even see it. If you look in the National Forum's guidebook, some saints are not celebrated on Sundays. They're only celebrated on their days. But there are certain saints who are important enough to be celebrated on Sunday. And one of the newer saints, for example, is Saint Nectarios. Well, a lot of churches add him to the November 9th. If November 9th falls on a Sunday, the choir will sing his Apollytikion. And he might even be celebrated in the Orthros. But he's not on the list as a saint that is celebrated on Sundays yet. But I feel that if enough churches do it, someday that he will be elevated to that position where he'll appear in the Typicon. But right now he's not there, and I think that's how it works. So I hope for Nick that was a good explanation. It's as close as I can come to, to answering that question. Okay, so I'm going to start my PowerPoint right now, and share my screen. One of the greatest achievements, oh wait, that's a different sheet. Got to get the right sheet here. Okay, this is issues concerning Greek Orthodox Church musicians in the coming years after the coronavirus pandemic. And this is basically thoughts that I have seen and I've observed. And you may have observed the same things as I have. And if you want to, join in and add something, that's fine too. But first, I think we should remind ourselves of why we are church musicians. I think it's very, very important, because we tend to fall into habits and practices, and we just do the same things over and over again, year by year by year by year. And sometimes we really have to remind ourselves is why we're doing this. So let's look at some general reasons for singing in an Orthodox church. First of all, to create musical prayer in a prayerful environment. The environment, the atmosphere is quite important. And then we also, specifically, the church musicians, help the congregation to follow and concentrate on the service prayers and lessons. We hope to inspire worshipers to love God as God loves us, to turn to God for help, for inspiration, to learn about the life of Christ and of the saints, so that we may emulate them, to look inward and turn away, which is the same thing as repenting, from worldly concerns, and prepare for the sacraments that bind us to God so we are worthy to receive them. And we also want to turn our love into deeds, charity, service work, alms, and strive for theosis, which is a very important Orthodox concept, to be like God. So we have a really big responsibility. There are also theological reasons for our music to be different and special, as opposed to worldly music. You know, why we don't do jazz liturgies or have rock bands in our church. There are reasons for us to have, theological reasons for us to have this special music. And I'm going to go through some of those. In the first place, the church's aesthetics may start from the worldly cultures that they are in, but ultimately they are transfigured by God. For example, icons. The early icons are patterned after Roman mosaics. So you can see here, this is just some guy in a Roman mosaic. But when they are made within the church, we may be borrowing the technology from the outside world, but we are transfiguring it. And how are we transfiguring it? Well, actually, it's God that's transfiguring it. And we can also say that God, by his angels, would direct the hand of the iconographer who makes this holy icon. And it becomes a holy icon. And it depicts whatever is in heaven, and in this case, Christ. Another thing, in relation to the icons, music is the same way. The music may be patterned after the music of the cultural area. For example, a lot of the early church music was influenced by Greek music, Syrian music, and the music of the Hebrews. But God, through his angels, ultimately, we believe, controls the hand of the hymnographer. So the music of the church becomes the music of heaven. And that is a pretty common belief in the Orthodox Church. The aesthetics of the church are not just symbolic. The icons, the architecture, the candles, the incense, the vestments, the chanting, they're not just symbolic of God's grace, but they are manifestations of God's grace. It goes beyond symbolic. Sacraments are real things that God does for us. The bread and the wine become the body and blood of Christ. The chrism, the oil, becomes the healing and changing balm. Dreams are turned into reality. Jacob dreamed of a ladder, and then he built the altar. Joseph dreamed and prevented a famine. Moses was given the tablets, and in a dream, he built the tabernacle to God's specifications. If you've ever read the first few books of the Bible, every little tiny thing in that tabernacle was directed by God, and how it should look and how it should be built and how it should be used. So Noah dreamt, then he built an ark that saved humanity and the animals. So what we're saying is that they all might come from worldly things, but they are all transformed into God's grace. Another theological reason for a special kind of music in the church. Worship's using all the senses, visual, oral, touch, smell, taste. The music carries the texts. So we hear them and memorize them in an appeal to our intellect, our emotions, our reason, and our spirit. Attention should always be paid to what is being said in the texts. It spurs us toward God in our actions. The hymn texts are the Orthodox Christian's owner's manual. Creation itself was the result of words. The scripture says God is the Word. We call God the Word. And God spoke and the universe was created. And when we sing and chant, we are writing those words on our hearts. Next slide. All right, getting into the music specifically, because the word is so important, when we chant or sing, whenever we do our music, we are painting these words. We're painting them musically. Music word painting is the heart and soul of Orthodox music. The words come first and the music is applied to them as we might apply paint to a canvas to create a picture. We use many musical devices for this. We might do pitch placement, extra notes, extra beats, melodic ornaments. For example, let's look at this piece of music here. Here's a few of the musical devices we use to paint the words. We have the word enite. The accent is very important in Greek words, and the accented syllable is ni. So let's look at it. It gets a higher note, and it gets more notes too. Enite. And then the word Lord, Kyrie, this accented syllable has the highest note. And we take a look at uranon, and the accent is on non. So non gets the highest note. And not only that, here's another example of word painting. It's depicting heaven in the music, because this is the highest note of the entire hymn. And so, since we're talking about heaven, heaven gets the highest note. And of course, you're familiar with the rest of this hymn. And I added the English version to show that we can't do these two notes on any. We can't do that because praise is the important syllable. So we'll start on the high note right away. Greek does this too. If we use this melody for litrosin, we go litrosin, because we don't need those two pickup notes. So, and then in the Greek, the accented syllable is on the last syllable. In English, we have a two-syllable word, and the accented syllable is on the first syllable. So I've seen translations that go heavens, but we don't put the accent on vens. I don't see anyone walking around saying heavens. So we would have to change the music to paint the words correctly. And that's what you can see it all through every of the 10,000 hymns in our church. Every one of them paints the words and paints it in a way that reinforces them and makes them more logical. And ornaments, actually this cadence here, this little thing, ah, yes, that's an ornament. Sometimes sacrallerie is just to put just a half note there. Ah, yes. But actually there is an ornament you put on there. So this is an ornament here. So we also use ornamentation. And we also use pitches. In this particular scale of the Byzantine mode, when you're going up, this B would be natural. But when you're going down, the B is flatted. Now it's not flatted as much as we flatted on an organ or something like that, but it's still flatted. And this is to show that coming down, gravity is pulling us. So you can see every single Orthodox hymn is just full of word painting. And I hope that when you look at these hymns, you notice the word painting, because I think it's very, very, very important. Therefore, as musicians, we must strive to make our voices clear, and pleasing to the ear, so that the word of God can be heard and understood. We do this for the good of the congregants as they worship. They pray, self-reflect, accept God's love, and then return it by changing their lives. And sorry, flipping these things too quickly. We're not here to put on a concert. We're not here so they can listen to the beautiful music we're singing and just go off into dreamland. We don't want them to be distracted from the words and from the text. So we better be careful that whatever we sing, in whatever style, we are not putting on a concert. We are emphasizing and painting the words. Okay? And this is not just my opinion. This is what many of the church fathers and people hierarchs and people I've talked to have said. That's who I learned it from. I didn't just make that up. Okay. Okay, where's that picture? There it is. These are pictures I cobbed off the internet. They're not of any particular people I know. But I thought this was kind of a neat picture. And because it's got the Kezios Orthros book here. Learning the proper ways to chant is a labor of love for church musicians wanting to serve God. It would be the same thing as writing icons, being a priest or a deacon, cleaning up the church, joining philoptikos, offering charity, treating others kindly, or any of the things that identify us as Christians. It is a labor of love. It is something we want to do for the church. And as we know, the church is not a building. The church is all the people together who are worshiping Jesus Christ. Okay, so now that I've reminded you why we are here and why we are church musicians and why we do what we do, let's go into some of the issues. I'm going to list some of the trends in American Greek Orthodox church music in recent years. And these are trends not only that I have seen myself, but that other people have talked about. And I'm talking about, maybe the last 15, 20, 30 years. Number one, there is an increased interest in returning to traditional Byzantine chant in the Divine Liturgy. I mean, we never lost Byzantine chant in the Orthros. We never lost it in the Vespers or in the sacraments. But there is, some people might say we did lose it because, they don't like the way we're chanting. Or it's just some guy from Greece who heard it when he was growing up and he sort of, improvises. So there's increased interest in actually chanting the right way. I also see a decreasing use of organs. When I was a little kid, the only reason I liked going to church is I could listen to the organ because everything was in Greek and I didn't understand anything. But we see more and more priests saying, don't use the organ, or if you do use it very softly. We've written National Forum letters on this and the use of the organ, and it's been discussed quite a bit. And it's continuing to change. So there's that. Number three, the blessing of women chanters. This is something that was brand new when we were starting off, because like Nancy was only the second woman in the whole history of the church to be blessed as a chanter. Her teacher, Jessica Suki-Palalis, was the first. But since those two women were blessed as chanters and given the rasophoros and have the authority to wear the raso, there have been many more women chanters that have been given that honor. And I even believe Jessica was tonsured, but I don't think that's a regular thing yet. We have seen the diminishing number of choir members. We've seen it in our churches. With the diminishing number of choir members comes the diminishing number of people in the right sections to do four-part music, although there are still several parishes with thriving four-part choirs. But this is something we have seen, not only Yeah, part of it may be the people getting older in the choirs, and young people aren't as indoctrinated in choral music in their schools as they used to be. If they are, their school choirs are usually show choirs or something jazzy. You know, they don't do a lot of serious music. Once in a while, they might try a serious piece, but it's not the way it was back in the 40s and the 50s. So we've seen that. We've seen the increased use of English, creating a need for good English translation and a good rendering to the traditional melodies. And we have to remember, like we saw in Inite ton Kyrion, that we can't always take the English words and squeeze them into Greek melodies. We have to say the words are most important, and we've got to adapt the melodies in some way to the words. But ever since the first Green Book came out, the use of English has increased and increased and increased. And in some churches now, it is dominant. And in a very few churches, it is the only thing they do. So we now have a new English translation of the Divine Liturgy. That's new. That's a trend. People are starting to use that. Other people like the older one, and their metropolitans are letting them use it. But that's something we have to look at. That's a trend. The establishment of schools of Byzantine chant using Byzantine notation and establishing certification of proficiency of chanters by the Holy Cross School of Theology. This is a new thing. Usually the only way you could learn to chant in the past was to stand next to your protopsaltis and learn. And you better hope that your protopsaltis was a good one if you wanted to learn it the right way. But now with the internet and with technology and with the increased interest, as we talked about in number 1, many young chanters are opening up schools, teaching on the internet, and there is much easier access to how to chant in the classical way, or what they might call the proper way. Not only that, and this is a very important point, this is one that Nancy gave me, the new priests are being immersed in and they are advocating the above trends. When a priest goes to, graduates from the School of Theology at Holy Cross, they have been using the new translation of English. Some of them have been learning the Green Book, the new Green Book. They are in tune to the young chanters and the schools of Byzantine chant. So these are what I see as very important trends that we should be paying attention to. Now I'd like to talk about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on our music. First of all, the use of technology to bring the services of local churches into homes throughout the world. If it weren't for the invention of Zoom, what we're using right now, this software, and the fact that many people now have broadband internet and computers are just, we carry them around in our pockets, in our smartphones. This technology, in some ways, you know, we think it's cut us off from the real world because we're sitting there looking at our phones all the time. But on the other hand, it is connecting us together in a way that we could never be connected before. So, and the COVID pandemic helped push that. Once we were all in lockdown, this technology spread all over the world, and we've been using it now. And I think we're going to continue to use it. And that's one of the questions we have to look at. How are we going to continue to use it? Also, I think the COVID pandemic, as we know, suspended Greek Orthodox Church choirs from participating in services for over a year, or maybe even 2 if you're not going to start again until, you know, September. It's almost 2 years. So how is that going to affect us? Because choirs have been, you know, on the shelf. They've been in the warm-up room. And so what's going to happen afterwards? The aging of the choir singers just by the length of the pandemic. And we're all getting older. Time does not stop. So are some of them going to decide not to come back to choir, or who are we going to get to replace them? I think these are issues that the pandemic has given us. Also, the fact that chanters are doing the Divine Liturgy now on the internet, and people are broadcasting their services to the homes. This is a revival of chanters doing the liturgy. Most of us are used to the choir doing the liturgy. So with the absence of choirs and the broadcasting of the services, people are becoming more familiar with chanters, especially the non-Orthodox goers. If they don't go to Orthodox and they don't go to any of those other services, then they've probably never heard chanters on a regular basis. So now they are through the Divine Liturgy, and that's something that happened. So I was alluding to these questions in the previous slide. Will the return to Byzantine chant be accelerated or more permanently established because of the pandemic? Maybe it was going to be that way anyway. Or maybe it'll slow down now that the choirs are back. How will the choirs and how will choir music change if it will or not? Will it change or won't it change? Will we just go back to doing what we did before the pandemic or not? That's a question that needs to be answered. Will choirs lose many members who decide not to return? We don't really know how many are going to be there and how many are not going to be there, but we'll see. How will it affect Sunday school attendance or other church ministries? The COVID has already elicited some lawsuits about people being required to go back to work in the office. I saw that on the news the other day. As some woman says, well, I work better at home now. You know, I'm more productive. You can't force me to go back to the office. Pandemic's not over either, you know, so how will it affect the other aspects of the church ministry besides just the music?
Stan, you have a question from Sophia.
Go ahead, Sophia. Do you have your microphone turned on?
Unmute yourself, Sophia.
Yeah, turn on your microphone. That little, yeah, there you go.
Thank you. There's a convergence in a couple of slides back that you mentioned that I'm conscious of. I've had people in the parish that I had been in for about 20 years as a choir member mostly, and most recently as a learning chant at the chanter stand. But this past year, I've had a few people of my generation in our 60s, maybe a little older, saying how they do not like the chanter doing the liturgy, and we're going to lose people because of it. And then, then I'm thinking, I'm just putting all this out there to be considered and discussed or whatever you want to say, but I'm thinking young people, how do they react to the chant? And I don't see them coming to the chanter stand to learn chant, like the youth choirs or whatever. They're learning Western notation, and it's not sounding like a chanter's chanting. So, and young people are not, aren't they notorious for not coming to church for the period of years when they go away to college? So we're gonna, if we lose that, and we lose the Western choirs because people, are getting older and not around. I just went to a wake of Takis This, who died, and he's been active in the church for decades. So then where are we left with no music? Yeah. How can we have to do something to inspire people, right, to learn and to do both? I think we have to have both.
Yeah, and we're going to get through a lot of that stuff in the rest of the presentation, and I think I'll save the discussion of that topic for the very end. But I will say that it's kind of all over the place. I've seen young kids who really dig the chant and they want to learn it, and so we can discuss that a little bit more after the presentation is over. But thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so how much do we actually follow and obey the church hierarchy? These are perennial questions. These are not new questions. How much do people just do their own thing? Should one English translation be imposed on everybody? Or should one form of music be imposed on everybody? These are questions that are already out there and have been discussed a lot. And so I'm going to get to the big one, the one that's been discussed the most amongst church musicians, the one that I am not making up, but it's something that I think we have to keep talking about when we continue. So the next slide, chant versus harmony. That's the big question. And as you see, I have a picture I got from the internet. This is a clip, this is a frame from the movie Godzilla versus Destroya. And sometimes it seems like some of the arguments they have about this are very much like Godzilla and Destroya. And you can decide which side is Godzilla and which side is Destroya.
But they're all alive. They're very alive, obviously, right?
Anyway, so chant versus harmony is like the big one that we talk about. So I feel that there are a lot of us, we choir peoples do not understand entirely Byzantine chant. It is not an easy subject to learn about. It is vast, and there are all kinds of subtleties, and it's got a very long history. And so I would just like to unlock some of the mysteries of Byzantine chant. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but these are things that maybe, you know, we didn't really think about a lot. And then I'll also talk about harmony as well. But I'm going to start with Byzantine chant. First of all, Byzantine chant, although it was taken from worldly sources at the time, you know, like Greek modes and, as I said, Syrian music, and most of all, Hebrew psaltery. Byzantine chant was created for Orthodox Church services. That was its reason for existing. That's its origin. If we didn't have the Orthodox Church, we wouldn't have Byzantine chant. It has its own notation and scales with their own idiomatic tunings. And they're very precise. They don't want you to, for example, be a jazz musician. They want you to follow these rules pretty strictly. Although there is some leeway, you know, for every chanter. There's still a body of rules. I've got a book here that some of you may know. It's The Great Theory of Music by Chrysanthos of Miletos. He was one of the 3 teachers who installed something called the new method, which was taking all of the centuries of Byzantine chant and sort of condensing the theory into one book. And so it's like a textbook. You want to know about Byzantine chant, you read this book. They have 8 modes. We all know that. Sometimes they're called tones. I think the reason they're called tones is because the Greek word eikos means tone. And so they're translated as tones. But if we look into scholarship of universities, whenever they talk about a musical system like this, they refer to it as a mode. So I think mode is a more scholarly term. Tones is a more practical and literal term. I use them interchangeably. I usually go with tones because if you look in any service book, they usually says the tone. It doesn't use the word mode. Maybe some of the newer ones do, but you know, like the Black Easter book always uses tones, and then the Russians use the word tone, and so 8 tones. I'm not going to get into them because that's Nancy's job in the next 2 workshops. As is number 4, Byzantine chant has 3 rhythmic styles. It doesn't have an infinite number of rhythmic styles. It's got 3 of them. And so it's limited. It is not meant to be a worldly art. It is musically limited. You don't have many dynamics at all in Byzantine chant, nor do you have many tempo changes. You know, like when in Western music, when you get to the end of a long piece, sometimes the tempo slows down to show that you're at the end. But the Byzantine music, instead of slowing down, it just adds a whole bunch of extra notes at the end to show you that you're at the end. But the tempo doesn't stop. The tempo doesn't change. It's like a heartbeat. It's always going. So it's a system of music with strict rules. And those rules, I want to say, are based on word painting. They are made for word painting. So that's what Byzantine chant is made for those things. Now let's look at composed polyphonic harmonized music, which many of our choirs use, which I've used, which I grew up in. And there's some very beautiful music has been written. And but let's compare it with Byzantine chant. First of all, its origins in the church. I'm talking about the church. I'm not going to talk about its origins in society and the world. But in the church, its origins are from the Western churches. Polyphonic harmonized music arose in Western Europe in the Catholic and Protestant churches. Now, there are some that say that Georgian Orthodox Church was one of the first churches to use harmony, but their harmony was probably a very rudimentary kind of harmony. And we really don't know that much about it. We have a few scores that are ancient and may indicate that they were singing in parallel thirds. But as for composed polyphonic music, that's a Western thing. So when we bring it into the Eastern Church, we have to remember that it was not made for our church. It was originally made for Catholic and Protestant churches. It uses staff notation. And a lot of chant people say, oh, staff notation, that's for instruments, that's for orchestras. And actually, that's not true. It actually was originally invented for chanting, monophonic chanting, Gregorian chant, that kind of chant. They invented staff notation for that. And staff notation, different kinds of staff notation have been used in other places. For example, in the Ukraine, the Ukrainians had their own form of staff notation. It didn't quite look exactly like the modern stuff, but you know, the shape of the notes, it had staff, you know, had staff lines. They were kind of bent, but you know, it was a very similar thing. So it's not a new thing. And even the guy who wrote this book, Chrysanthos, he considered, when he was going to do his new method, he considered using staff notation. He was very close to doing it, but he decided not to. He decided just to take the neumes, the linear notation, and sort of standardize it. But he even has a chapter in the book explaining harmony and how it's used in staff notation. And I think that's one of the things that repels some Orthodox from using staff notation. Is so easy to show harmony, and they don't want you to harmonize. Whereas other Orthodox churches use harmony all the time. It's become a norm in the Slavic churches. So the notation, the staff notation is not an evil thing. And you can chant Byzantine chant using staff notations. If you know the Byzantine rules, it doesn't matter what notation you're using. You know, most of the early chanters just learned it by ear. So you can use staff notation and still chant in a Byzantine way, if you know. The harmonized music is not orally compatible with Byzantine chant. And the reason is because if you take the Western diatonic scale and you form a triad, you know, 1, 3, 5, you put those together. If you tried to do that on some of the Byzantine scales, there would not be a triad. It would be out of tune, it would sound sour, it would just sound wrong. So it's not orally compatible. The Western diatonic scale is not the same as the Byzantine diatonic scale. The Western scale only has half steps and whole steps, whereas the Byzantine diatonic scale, we'll talk about this later, has you know, microtones. Western harmonized music is major or minor only. There are some Byzantine hymns, you can't tell if it's major or minor. You really can't, because they're using a scale that's completely foreign to Western music. This music can be very artistic, unlimited amount of variation in melody, rhythm, tempo, dynamics, tone color, modulations. You can get so creative with Western polyphonic harmonized music. You can come up with all kinds of chords, ninth chords, seventh chords, dissonance, all kinds of tritones. It's very colorful music. And unlike Byzantine music, which, as I said, is limited to certain rules, there's almost like no rules when it comes to polyphonic harmonized music. And I know that liturgies like Chris Kipros's, they don't necessarily follow any kind of Byzantine standards. You know, it's just pretty much composed music that comes from the composer. Also, it requires more rehearsal because those chords do have to be tuned up, and you have 4 different parts you have to learn. So you have to rehearse more. Whereas the Byzantine system, they already have these model melodies that everybody memorizes, and a lot of the hymns are just metered to those melodies. And so they don't need a lot of practice. You know, they can pretty much just read it, sight read it. Of course, it took them 5 years to learn how to do it, but once they learned how to do it, they don't have to rehearse or practice. Now, this is a chart that I made, and I want to really explain the real difference between Byzantine music and Western music, because it can be seen on this chart. And basically what I want to show, this is not the kind of stuff Nancy's going to do next week. She's going to talk about the tones and the various things you can do to recognize them. But I want to talk about the scales. This is a chart of scales. To the left of this line are the Western scales, and to the right of this line are the Byzantine scales. And I would like you all just to focus here on the major scale. The major scale is like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We all know that. And whereas the Greek scale kind of starts on ni, if you were going to do it as do, re, mi. Ni, pa, vu, ga, di, ke, zo, ni. That's the Greek diatonic scale starting on ni. You see these numbers here. These numbers come from a Byzantine system. The Byzantines, these numbers represent the intervals between the notes. Do, re, that distance between do and re is an interval. And as you can see, we got whole steps and half steps in that. A major scale is 2 whole steps, a half step, 3 whole steps, and a half step. The Greeks have divided the entire octave into 72 micro intervals, little tiny intervals that you probably wouldn't even notice what they were if you went from one to another. But just like the turtle going slowly, he finally gets to his destination. So these little lines on the left side of the scale are these micro intervals that the Greeks had done, and they put 72 micro intervals for each octave, and they're called morea. So there's 72 morea in the octave, in the scale. And if we were to count out the number of morea for the Western major scale, it'd be 12, 12, 6 morea, 12 morea, 12, 12, and 6. And those perfectly show our whole steps and half steps. Now, if we look at the minor scale is the same. They have whole steps and half steps. The only difference is with the minor scale, you don't start on do, you start on la, so that the mi, fa comes in a different place, and the ti, do comes in a different place. So we're going la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. Now you might notice this little thing here on the last 2 steps. Western music has a thing called harmonic minor. And this is important in understanding some of the Byzantine hard chromatic scale. what they do is they take an extra half a step and they add it to this step. And so that's a step and a half. And so there's 18 morea in the melodic minor scale right here. So we'll go la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. So we had to make a pretty big 1.5 step leap here. So these are the Western scales. Now let's look at them in comparison to the Byzantine scales. First thing I'd like you to notice, see this yellow line here, and this yellow line here, and this yellow line, and that yellow line? These are the perfect intervals. We call them perfect intervals. From here to here is a perfect octave. From here to here is a perfect fourth, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4 notes. From here to here is a perfect fifth. So a perfect fourth has 30 morea. A perfect fifth has 42 morea, and a perfect octave has 72. These never change, not even in Byzantine music. Byzantine music is the same as Western music when it comes to the perfect intervals. So where does Byzantine music scales differ? In between the perfect intervals. Now, when we take a scale and we cut it in half, we call that a subscale. A scale that's got 4 notes is called a tetrachord. So if we look at this tetrachord here, goes from this note to this note, and then there's an upper tetrachord that goes from this note to this note, starting at the perfect interval and going to the octave. I'm going to be talking about those tetrachords later. I'm not going to talk about them right now, but I'd like you to notice the difference here. I'm going to start with the enharmonic Byzantine scale. What do you notice about this? Do you notice anything about this compared to the Western? It's the same as our major scale.
It's well tempered.
Yeah, it's evenly tempered, just like the Western scales. So Byzantine music does use a Western scale in its enharmonic hymns. And that would be tone 3 and tone 7 mostly, okay? So, so it does exist. Usually they start on a Ra, which we might, if we were doing fixed pitches, say is F, like an F major scale. But in practice, we actually move those steps around. It's a movable do system in practice, but in writing, it's a sort of a fixed do system. Now look at the diatonic scale. It's very similar to the major scale if we start on ni. If we start on pa, it's more like a minor scale. But if we start on ni, the only difference is we take this half step and we lower it 2 morea. Now, if you heard 2 morea, you might not hear a difference. And so when people hear the Byzantine diatonic scale, they basically hear, a Western diatonic scale, but it isn't. Because if you have a chanter who has trained and learned how to hit those spots in between the cracks, it really is not the same. And same with the soft chromatic scale. I'm going to show you this is the soft chromatic scale. Now you have to understand that the main note is not down here. The main note in the soft chromatic scale is up here in the middle. It's the D, or we would call it a G in Western. So the D is where you start. You start there. So you start with a short interval, and then you've got a wide interval, a short interval. But it sure doesn't match anything in the Western scales. And it's sort of a slight flat. If you were going to flat this note all the way in a Western scale, you'd have 6 here, not 8. So you can see that's right in the, this is the hardest of all the scales to learn, to sing correctly if you're learning Byzantine music. But what does it do? What it does is it makes it sound different. I mean, your ear might hear a major scale, but you might not feel a major scale. I want to give you an example of this. I've got some recordings of Byzantine choir doing this tone, okay? Now I want you to tell me, does it sound major or minor to you? Okay, I'm gonna play it right now, so I hope you have your speakers on. Can you hear it? Okay, now those E-zone holders there, they were droning on this note here. They were droning right there on that note, and the music was going up and down and below it and everything. Now, did you get a feeling that it was major? Did you get a feeling that it was minor? When I asked Denise this when we were doing our practice session, she said she couldn't tell. It sort of sounded like both a little bit. And a little bit it does. But here's the difference between Byzantine music and Western music. Western music, you'd be able to tell if it was major or minor. Byzantine music, you can't tell. And that's even true of some of these subtle changes. You may not hear it with your ear because your ear is trained to tune it up to the scale that you're familiar with. But you can feel it. You can feel that it's different. You can feel that Byzantine scale is different. The most interesting scale of all is the hard chromatic scale. And I am going to let someone else explain it to you.
We've got a couple questions before.
Oh, okay, sure.
Sophia and then Valerie. Go ahead, Sophia.
I'm willing to admit my ignorance. I don't remember what it means to be a major scale and a minor scale. So why is that important for me to notice the difference? I wouldn't know what to identify it as.
Well, people talk about, the reason I am doing this is because people talk about Byzantine music as if they know what it is. And what they're doing is they're coming at it from a reference point of Western music. And if they have a Western music in their ears and they hear Byzantine music, they say, well, I don't hear anything different, you know, but maybe they're not feeling the difference because, and maybe the Byzantine chanter doesn't know them. Maybe the Byzantine chanter doesn't know these intervals and they're just singing in a whole notes and half step, whole steps and half steps. So what I'm trying to point out is that Byzantine music sounds different, not because it's a bunch of guys or not because it's a bunch of Greeks, but it's because they're actually singing, you know, on different scales. And they're singing in between the perfect intervals. So the scales aren't that different, but they are microtonally different. And to some people, it might sound like it's out of tune, but that's a bad description. It's different, and it's supposed to be different because they're trying to evoke certain kinds of emotions in the worshiper, emotions of compunction, to repent for sins and things like that. And it all depends on the hymn, what you're singing about. You'll pick a different scale for a different hymn. If you want to sing about something joyful, you might not use a soft chromatic scale. Soft chromatic scales are mostly used for telling stories about saints and things like that. And their lives were different. And it's like icons. Icons are not like Leonardo da Vinci's paintings. They are transfigured. And that's what we're doing. We're transfiguring the music. They call these notes here in Greek, thora. And that means to corrupt. And because they're corrupting these notes, they're moving them just ever so slightly so that you feel it, but you don't necessarily hear it. But that's what they want you to do. They want you to feel the music differently. So that's why it's built that way.
Thank you.
What was the other question?
Yeah, a couple things. Well, first, the Torah are not actually these notes. They're symbols.
Symbols,
That,
right, that represent them.
Symbols that tell you to switch from the tone that you're in
Yes,
to a different one. And so they're corruptions of the tone in that
yes,
sense.
yes.
But what I was going to point out was with these differences in Moria that we see, where they're in the cracks, so to speak, as you pointed out, it's interesting how different cultures have adjusted them differently. And what I mean by that is second tone, the one that you just played the example of.
Yeah.
Which is, like you said, one of the most difficult perhaps because that flatted K is really in the cracks between A and A flat. And Sakalaridis and then Anastasiou and then most Greek American composers following them have just eliminated the flat and turned it into a kind of major key. But when I was choir director at an Antiochian church years ago, decades ago, I discovered that the Arabs had done the opposite. They turned it into a full flat.
Yeah.
So the soft chromatic became a hard chromatic. So I just thought it was interesting how the two different cultures, Western and Eastern,
Right.
adjusted to that.
Valerie, I think a lot of it also has to do with Sakalaridis was putting it into staff notation. And then you had to decide, do you put an A flat there or do you put an A natural? And, you know, the answer is, I don't know. Some did an A flat, Rubanis did an A flat, and Sakalaridis did an A flat, but Father Seraphim doesn't do an A flat. So I know John Boyer tried to make a new symbol, and Frank Desby did too, to make a new symbol of like a half flat.
Right. Well, that's not a new symbol, but it was new for us to use.
Right, new for us.
With a flat, with a
Exactly,
slash through it.
Yes. But be that as it may, I don't want to get too deeply into this, but I want you to look at the hard chromatic. If you look here, let's go back to the
We have, whoops.
is there another one? You're muted, Denise.
Oops, I'm sorry. I thought I unmuted myself. Martha had a question.
Oh, Martha.
Yeah,
George. Martha. Oh, Martha Payne.
I've got two kind of things that are sort of fitting together. Part of it ties in with what you were talking about, what's going to happen when the choirs get back together. Well, our choir director retired, and we're getting a new choir director who's coming from the Romanian tradition. And I think Dean, our chanter, is going to be doing some training with him. But presumably, I mean, what you're showing us here is that standard across the jurisdictions, or is he going to have difficulty transferring what he knows from the Romanian jurisdiction
Marnie,
into Greek?
Marnie, it's just a standard amongst people who learn the classical chant. I mean, no one has said this is standard, because it might vary from church to church. All depends on the training of the chanters. If they've been trained into hearing these intervals and singing these intervals, then, you know. But this is something I think we can discuss at the end, because I want to make sure I get to the end of my presentation before we have a few minutes to talk about it.
And Stan, George, did you have a question?
Not really a question. I'll save it for later.
Okay.
All right. I want to bring your attention back to the minor scale, the harmonic minor, that extra 1.5 step. Well, if you took this tetrachord here and you doubled it on the bottom and the top, then you would have something close to the hard chromatic scale. As you can see, there's half step, a giant 20 moria leap, and a tiny 4 moria half step or micro step. So it's even tinier than this. And the reason I want this next person to discuss it is because he does such a good job. And he's just a young guy. And let me see if I can find it here. Okay, so this is a website that is run by a young man named Michael Azar, and he is a Byzantine chanter, but he's only 18 years old, but he's obviously been learning it for a long time. And he's made this, and I like this, the tutorials that are on this website because they're short, and he has a very nice way of teaching. But he explains really well the hard chromatic scale, which is why Byzantine music is different than Western music, okay? So I'm gonna go to his Learn the Tones section here. And I'm going to go to the hard chromatic scale. Just listen to what he says, because it's very, especially at the very end, he uses a special computer keyboard to actually play those micro tunes on a keyboard. So here's Michael.
Everyone, it's Michael Azar here, and welcome back to the channel where we talk about singing technique, Byzantine music, and music theory in general. Now today, we are going to be talking about a Byzantine scale called the hard chromatic scale, or more commonly known, the double harmonic minor scale. Now, I see a lot of YouTubers trying to explain this, but they are only comfortable in Western theory. And a Western musician trying to explain this scale is basically an English speaker trying to teach Chinese. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong necessarily, but they don't use the correct terminology, and a lot of the concepts that Byzantine musicians use, they are not comfortable with. So first, let's begin on explaining this scale. As in the name double harmonic minor, this scale includes 2 tetrachords of harmonic minor. So, pa, vo, ga, di, and then ke, zo, ni, pa. We have 2 tetrachords of this harmonic minor sequence. Now, I'm going to teach you guys how to divide up the scale and actually analyze the scale using Byzantine terms and then convert those terms into Western music. So let's begin. In a Byzantine scale, there are 72 morea. All right? Now, morea is how you divide up the scale, and this tells the interval between the notes. So, for example, let's convert this into half steps. We know that in a scale, there are 72 morea, and in a scale, there's 12 half steps. So 72 divided by 12 equals 6, meaning that there are 6 morea in a half step. So, knowing this, we can convert any Byzantine scale we want into Western terminology, so it's easier for Western musicians to understand. So first things first, let's review the Byzantine scale. Let's compare this to Western scale. So the Byzantine scale is ni, pa, vo, ga, di, ke, zo, ni, which is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So knowing this, let's learn the context of the tone 6 scale. So now we know what the scale notes are verbally. Let's think about this. The bass note in the double harmonic minor scale is pa, di, or re. Now, the morea wise, this is the 72 morea outline. Remember, 6 morea is equal to a half step. So, pa, vo is a half step. 20 morea is 3 half steps plus a third of a half step. Now, this might sound weird, but a lot of people call this the augmented second. I don't like that. I just like calling it 20 morea. That's what it is. It's 20 morea. Don't put Western terms in Byzantine terms, because if you do, you're not understanding the concept behind the music. So let's look at this. pa, vu, ga, di. So D, E flat, F, and then F sharp plus a third sharp, F sharp plus a third sharp, and then D, so Ra to D completes it. Why is this for? Well, basically, this takes a third sharp from this. So in order to resolve back to the fourth pa, di, it has to take 2 from this. And this is why this is 4. So if we do the math, this is 30 morea, meaning this is 5 half steps. And 5 half steps is a fourth. Now, let's continue the scale. Remember in the beginning how I said this scale is 2 tetrachords combined together? Well, this is a whole step. Why? 12 morea is 2 half steps. Same exact scale degrees here as here. The only thing that separates them is the D and K. And now this pattern repeats itself. We add 12 and start again. Pa, vu, ga, di, ke, di, ra, vu, pa, ni, zo, ke, di, ra, vu, pa, pa, ni, zo, ke, di. Right? It repeats itself all the way throughout the scale. Now I'm going to convert this to Western terms so you guys can understand it. Alright, so let's look at how this looks in Western terms so we can understand it for those who are not Byzantine musicians. So the bass note is D. So ba, D, D, E flat, F sharp plus a third sharp, G, and then whole step, A, B flat, C sharp plus a third sharp, D. Now, most people don't use this third sharp when they're singing it because they don't hear it. But you have to hear it. So what I'm going to do is put this into a software where we can actually hear the notes being played, not from my voice, but from a computer. So it's the most accurate tone we can get. All right, so we have the software set up now. Let's begin. First things first, the root key is D. Pa. Now, we have 6 morea from Pa to vu, which is E flat. And we know that the scale degree is 6 morea. And 6 morea is a half step. That's perfect. Keep it that way. Next, the F sharp is 20 morea from the E flat, meaning it is 3 half steps plus a third. That 2 extra morea is a third half step. So let's simply add it. See, it sounds a little out of tune, and that's exactly what we want right now. Then we go to A, because this is 12 morea from. So A, and then B flat, and then C sharp has to be a third sharp. So let's hear the whole scale. See, it sounds a little out of tune, but that's what you want. You want it to be out of tune. Why? Because that's what the Byzantine scale is. If you make it in tune, you're not playing a Byzantine scale, you're just playing a Western scale. And this is kind of washing the music away from its Byzantine roots if you do that. But if you keep it like this and remove the sharps, I'll show you what it sounds like. See, in tune, normal. Out of tune, funky, Byzantine, Oriental. This is what we want when we're singing this scale. So now we learned the double harmonic minor scale or the hard chromatic scale and how to convert it into staff notation using the Byzantine morea and preserving the Byzantine essence in the scale itself. I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, I would greatly appreciate if you liked and subscribed. Other than that, I'll see you on the next one and have a great day.
All right, so you can see that he played them right one after the other. Could you hear a difference between the two? Think about it. Could you hear a difference?
Slight, yes.
When I listened to it really carefully, I could hear a difference. But I think the fact is most Western trained musicians, your ear is going to adjust that interval. And because when you're looking at this hard chromatic scale, the lower tetrachord and the upper tetrachord are the same. And this is the big interval here. And remember that he said this is not just an F sharp, it's an F sharp with an extra third of a sharp. Your ear might adjust for it. But my contention is that you feel it differently. It's there, it's actually higher, so you feel it differently. And that's what Byzantine music wants you to do. Byzantine music wants you to feel it differently. And that's really the big difference between Byzantine music and Western music, is you feel it differently. It's maybe subconscious, however your psychologists want to describe it, but don't go around saying that there's no difference, because in theory, there is a difference. Maybe in practice, maybe someone didn't learn it very well, and so you don't hear it, or maybe you're not really listening, whatever. The point is, there is a difference. It's not just an academic argument. There is an actual physical difference if it's done correctly. All right. Now I'm going to look into what are the areas in between harmony or Western music and Byzantine music. I've got one I use, simple Byzantine chant. I'm asking, is this a new way, or is this a way that we have been doing already and we just don't realize it? Simple Byzantine chant really doesn't have the microtunings. It uses staff notation. It uses the traditional melodies, and they're written out as monophonic with just a drone, no harmony. It follows Byzantine musical system rules and rubrics for the 8 tones. It keeps the traditional ornaments and accents on the main syllables. It keeps the note attractions, like the B natural going up and the B flat going down. But the use of microtonal intervals is decided by the individual chanter. If he's learned them, he can put them in. If she hasn't learned them, then she can leave them out. But the idea is that you're still using Byzantine chant. You're just not using the hardcore one that sounds or feels different. Folk harmony might be added spontaneously in the manner of parallel thirds, for example. Now, our website, New Byzantium Publications, generally uses this format. I would call this the simple form of Byzantine chant. It's simple to us because we don't have to learn the special notation. We don't have to learn the different kinds of scales with the micro tunings to use this website. When you go to our website, there are 3 main buttons here: individual hymns, church services, and information. And there's a lot of theoretical information, historical information in this one. But I want you to look here, for example. If we go to the hymns, I've got the hymns organized in just various miscellaneous hymns for the liturgy proper, the alternate hymns like substitutions for communion hymns and things like that, the Femes, the hierarchical hymns, Christmas carols. I even have national anthems on this. I even have the state song of Michigan, which just because I had it, I stuck it in there. And then I've got the Manaean, which is the fixed feasts. They're all in the same dates every year, and doing it by month, starting with the first month of the year in the church calendar. And then I got the movable feasts in this column, the Triodion, pre-Lent and Lent, the Salutations music, the Lazarus and Palm Sunday, Holy Week, and the Lamentations. It has a special section because I got so many different versions of the Lamentations. And then the Pentecostalion starting with Pascha. And what you would do is say you need a hymn for November 8th. I picked that day because I know what it is. First of all, November 8th, you have to start singing the the Kotakion for the entry of the Theotokos in the temple, or Katharotatos. You have to start singing that on that date, if Sunday falls on November 8th, and then going all the way through the 19th. That's your Kondakion. So here on the 11th of the 8th, there are there's one Apolitikion for the archangels, because this is the synaxis of the archangels. And then you've got the communion hymn for the angels, so you would find it there. And then in these columns here, you see you've got the Greek staff notation, English staff notation, and the English Byzantine staff notation, and plus a MIDI audio so you can hear what the melody sounds like. So you would go to say you wanted to know what the archangels Apolitikion sounded like. Well, let's do the Okatharotatos. All right, I'm going to click on the PDF for the Greek notation, and there it is. And you notice in this, it's kind of more hard chromatic. I did put in the A flats, although you could do it without the A flats, but I wanted to use both of them. That's why I see the simple notation. You don't try to hit it in the crack. You either sing the flat or you sing the natural. And in this particular instance, this being in fourth tone, which is also uses soft chromatic.
It's a borrowed second.
Yeah,
tone,
it's borrowed,
melody.
right. So it's soft chromatic. So D is the main note, except when you get to the very, very end in fourth tone, it often goes down to E on these cadences. On the very final cadence, though, like Valerie says, it's borrowed soft chromatic from second tone. But Okatharotatos, I did a kind of a half flat there, but you could do either a full flat or you could do a natural. And then on this one, I did a natural on the A's. So that's what a simple chant, sort of is. It's available here. And then you can go back and you can sing the same thing in English. And this is Nancy's translation, and she's very good at putting the accents in the right places. The purest temple that has brought forth the Savior. And I always think that a good lyric is if you just read it, would it sound weird or not? The purest temple that has brought forth the Savior, the most precious bridal chamber and virgin, the sacred treasury of the glory of God, on this day has entered into the Lord's habitation. To me, that's a good translation, but I'm biased because I'm married to her. But anyway, so you can get the English. And then if you're a Byzantine chanter, you can usually find the Greek music anywhere. But because you can't find a lot of Greek music, then the third column, you can get it in the neumes and in Byzantine notation. And you can put those A flats right where they belong if you want them. So you've got your choice. So this is one of my concepts as simple chant. Also, I want to talk about this folk harmony. While I was getting ready for this presentation, I was studying the Carpatho-Russian tradition. All of the Slavic churches, they early on started with Byzantine chant, and they sort of converted it to their own language, the Slavic language, which is a dead language now. It's not used anymore, but they still use it in church. But this kind of chant in the Slavic churches, they all came from what they called znameni chant. And this was originally a kind of a form from the Byzantine, but it's changed. And the Carpatho-Russians, their music comes from znameni chant, but it comes from other sources as well, a Ukrainian Kievan chant, and some other chants that are in that area. And what they did is they put a book together of all the model melodies, all the main melodies. It's called the Prostopinia. And in that book, those are the melodies they use in all of the Carpatho-Russian churches. And they are all monophonic. And when you see the music that the chanter is holding, it's all monophonic. But what happens when it's actually done in the church and in the liturgy? What happens is the entire congregation sings with the chanter. And when they sing, they naturally put in harmony. And it sounds something like this. This is an actual Carpatho-Russian service. And this is how it normally sounds in many of their churches. Listen. It's rather lovely if you like harmonized music, but the music is not harmonized in the books or the scripts. It's just a harmony that comes from the soul of the people. And I've kind of simulated it here. If you look on our website, you go to the services and go to the Divine Liturgy page. And we do have books with the Vaporis 1973 translation and with the new official GOAA translation. And if you look at the book, you'll see that all of the music in it is monophonic. It's all, melody and e-song. That's all it is. However, if you would like to create the kind of sound we heard with the Carpatho-Russians, you can go back and you can get the one that says, let's see, 3-part harmony. And you can look at these hymns and you can see it's mostly an E-song on the bottom, parallel thirds on the top, and it'll sound a lot like what we just heard from them. So this is like a middle road you could take between pure chant and pure composed harmony. Now, I'm not, as I said at the beginning, I'm not advocating for any of these different paths that you might take forward. But what I'm saying is there are many options that we can look at, and we can evaluate those options as to whether they are appropriate for our church. Because after all, people that are making the decisions are going to be the individual parishes. Each parish will be a different situation, but keeping in mind the purposes of music in the Orthodox Church and knowing the alternative routes that the Greek Orthodox music ministry may take in future parishes, in the future, parishes will be able to adapt to the situation. So that's what I'm saying is, I'm not going to make the decision. One person isn't going to make the decision. The decision is going to be made by what we do in our individual parishes and what sort of the Holy Spirit leads us to do. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and I'm going to open it up for any kind of conversation or chat or anything else.
I think George had a question from before, and he was going to save it till now.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm
George?
going to turn off my sharing. All right. And we can use this as our forum board here for discussion.
Is George still there?
George?
I don't see him. He may be gone. I don't see him.
Just saw him a second ago.
I did too, but
Oh, all right.
any other questions? Comments?
I just have thank you, Stan, for really bringing all of this out. And I guess the one comment that I want to make is that, and I've said this to so many people so many times before, I don't understand why people think that it needs to be either or. I think that there is plenty of room for both musical traditions in our church, both the four-part harmonization, Western style music, and the traditional, neo-traditional, Neo-Byzantine chant. And I think that there's room not only in terms of separate services, like, you know, putting the chanters at Orthros and the choir at the liturgy, but combining the two.
Anybody else?
I would just say, how many chanters join the choir at, you know, after they're done with Orthros for Divine Liturgy? I don't think it hasn't been my experience in the few churches that I've been in that they'll do that.
Yeah, then some will and some won't. That's just the way it is.
And
I used to, and so does one of the other members of our choir.
Yeah. I think we have a lot of exploring to do. I know one priest at St. Nicholas Flushing, who's no longer there, he went down south to Virginia or something, but he gave a presentation to some young adults that I happened to be at. And he said, because I asked him what caused our church music to change to four-part Western, you know, melodies. And he said it was at the turn of the last century when the Orthodox Church was trying to assimilate into American culture that became necessary.
Well,
So,
but how did it change in the Slavic churches? How did it change in Russia? I mean, they weren't trying to, you know, they weren't trying to assimilate into their own culture.
Well, Peter the Great was. I mean, I think that you do have to look at the influence of Peter the Great, but Sakalarides was in Greece doing this harmonization, and that was Agia Irini. He was at Agia Irini in Monastiriki in Athens, which later became...
Wasn't he from Western Greece and was very influenced by Italian music?
I don't know about Western Greece. I do know that that he was at Agia Irini in Monastiriki, because it was kind of a great irony in Greece that that later became the home of Lykurgos Angelopoulos and his Byzantine choir. But certainly, I mean, I think that there's again, it's a both and rather than an either or. I think there are multiple influences. So you're right about, you know, that Sakalarides was getting his own Western influences there. Here in the United States, I think one of the things, particularly for the organ, was the fact that many Greek parishes in the early days, they didn't build their own churches initially. They didn't have the money for that. They simply purchased or rented Protestant and Catholic churches, which already had organs in them, as they also had pews. And so both of those elements you see coming into Greek Orthodox parishes in the US, because their elements were already in those churches that we initially bought.
But Valerie, if you've ever read the introduction to the Anastasio hymnal, he claims that he brought in the first electric organ in Tarpon Springs. Yes.
Yeah, I think he's giving himself more credit probably.
But you know, it all boils down to it does start in the parishes themselves.
Yeah.
And it kind of becomes a movement. And whether it's right or wrong, you know, that's not anything I can say. You know, I'm not a theologian or anything like that. but I do know that the way things happen. Nick, I don't know if you were here at the very beginning, but I was answering your question about how hymns, were written and who decides who's going to write them. And basically the answer is that they are written by maybe someone who is close to the new saint, like, if there's a new saint, like Paisos or something like that, people remember him. They might write it on their own, and they start passing it around from church to church. And once it becomes, used a lot and more people are using it than any other thing, then the church will kind of make it official. So it's not from the top down, it's mostly from the bottom up, like what we're talking about right now.
Just as with canonization itself, who becomes a saint? We don't have the kind of formal procedures that exist in the Roman Catholic Church. And you're right about Paisios, that, well, he was still alive when I lived in Thessaloniki. And, friends of mine, male friends of mine, would go in and meet with him on Mount Athos when they were there. And he was a spiritual father to a women's monastery in Suroti, right outside of Thessaloniki. But also that parish idea here in St. Louis, for instance, at St. Nicholas, we in our early days had a paid 8-person choir that was, these were all Western trained musicians. I don't even think they were Orthodox. Now, where did that come from? Who knows? But that was something we had over 100 years ago here at St. Nicholas.
And no one's gonna do everything perfectly, no matter what system you're using. And so, I think we need to, that's why I meant the first part of my presentation, we need to remember why we're here and why we are doing what we're doing. And let us adapt our music to our purpose and our mission and what we're supposed to do.
And going back to the painting, when you talk about the Byzantine music, seeing a renewed interest, because it does lend itself to the painting with the words. But it seems that Western, with its abilities to change tempos and dynamics, and it has a more able to provide that painting. So why are we seeing that change? Why are we seeing that shift to the more traditional Byzantine painting?
I think, well, number one, we're a traditional church. We like our traditions, they veered off at times. They've always come back, like the painting of icons back around the turn of the 20th century. In that era, were very romantic and very realistic. I remember going to your church, Denise, and seeing a profile of Jesus, a side profile of Jesus, and saying, oh, they wouldn't do that, in the traditional Byzantine thing. But they always tend to come back to them. So we are a traditional church. But there's no question, Nick, you're right, that Western music is very capable of highlighting certain words and concepts and ideas. The question is, I think what people, and this is not my opinion, but maybe someone coming from the Byzantine perspective would say, well, yes, but it's too much. It's too pretty. And it ends up distracting you away from the words because you're listening to that great chord progression, And so I think that would probably be the main argument that a Byzantine person would make from that standpoint.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I think a really important question to answer, and I don't know if anybody has a feel for it, but what is the status of the numbers of people in our youth choirs where it's, where I think, I don't know, the word need kind of troubles me a little bit, but we need our young people to grow into this. And do we have youth choirs in abundance that are sticking around and becoming the adult choirs of the future?
Yeah.
Enough, what we're seeing in our metropolis is really a growth of youth chant choirs.
Yes.
They're not in
Thank
the
you,
more
God.
what we consider our traditional
Uh-huh.
in fact, in our oratorical festival, we've included voice in that. And the winners this year were the young children that sang chant and not our polyphonic hymns.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
glad-
I've talked to John Boyer and Sam Heron and some of the guys who are doing, the schools I
Second school.
talked about, the Byzantine music schools. And they say the kids just eat it up. They go in there and it's kind of cool, because they're doing something different than anything they do outside of it. And even converts are attracted to it. So yeah, there is some interest there. As far as our 4-part choirs, we've been trying for years and years to get kids involved, and to some success and some not maybe, but it's just an ongoing, effort to try to.
Martirio.
I can say that within my own parish here at St. Nicholas in St. Louis, we have gone to a chant choir, and our main chanter has gone to the youth and they have not joined. Where when we had our youth choir, they did come up and sing with the adult choir.
Yeah,
so I think it does depend. It depends on where you are. I think it really does depend on where you are and the kind of program and the kind of people that are teaching.
Yes,
It's a very individual thing, I believe.
Right across the board. And in public schools too. I was just talking to my son. He was talking about some teachers who are more effective than others with the little kids. But he talked about one teacher where all the girls in band quit. Because the girls, so they have a band that's all boys. And that wouldn't happen with, say, a woman teacher or something, or maybe another person, I don't think, I don't know.
Man.
But it all depends on the teacher. The teacher was driving them away. And just like that, there are teachers that attract them to them, like magnets. So yeah, it's very, very important that we get dedicated people who want to be inclusive, whether it's a youth choir or whether it's a chant choir, whatever it is. But I think the health of church music in the future after the pandemic is all dependent on us if it's going to be successful. It's all going to be dependent on how hard we work and how well we work together, and the lines of communication going back and forth. And, that's what's going to keep us going, I think.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Anybody else?
Well, I'd like to thank Stan for on behalf of our federation, and thank Denise, of course, and her committee for putting this together. But Stan, thank you so much. You're one of the stars in our Orthodox Church that we appreciate so much, and thank you for taking the time to be part of this for us. And of course, our best to Nancy. We look forward to her presentation as well. So thank you so much.
Right here next to me.
Oh, is she there? I see the hand.
Nancy, stick your head in, please.
Go ahead, stick your head in.
I just wrote in the chat.
There she is.
There she is. Nancy will be our presenter for next week. Then we will have a week off for Father's Day, and we will return on the 27th. So the 13th and the 27th, the same link. So be here, and we will all be here. I will let you in. I'm still getting used to this whole Zoom meeting thing, but we're working on it, and I think it went pretty well today. And we have recorded this. It will be edited, and we will be posting that on the Chicago website. And hopefully, Nick, can we post this on the forum website as well?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
And Stan, I do apologize. I was late because I was on a Zoom meeting with Vicky, as a matter of fact. We're getting ready for our National Forum annual meeting. And a lot of what you discussed tonight, we're looking forward to a roundtable discussion that might really touch upon some of what you brought up to us this evening. So we're really looking forward to it. And I think maybe we really have hit upon an interesting subject that might really interest a lot of people. So keep August 27th, 28th, and 29th open.
Yeah, knowledge is power. The more we know about our music, the more we can discuss it and make decisions.
Right.
A quick question. Are you going to make your PowerPoint available?
Sure.
Because I forgot to, I got my times mixed up too.
I'll tell you what, I will, if you go to newbiz.org, okay, and you go to the third button down where it says
Where
information,
you have your,
education,
yeah,
I will have a link to the PowerPoint. Okay.
perfect. I've been there many times.
Oh, okay. Yeah, then you can click on it and you can see the PowerPoint slides.
And echoing what Nick said, I'll thank you on behalf of my federation. This was wonderful. I'm going to keep pushing on them to at least go watch the replay.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds great. Anybody else, or should we sign off for the evening and see you back here next week?
Yep.
All
Well,
right.
thank you all again for coming.
It's so
And
great to
I'm
see
gonna
your
end
wonderful
this.
faces.
It is wonderful to see everybody here. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Stan. You did a phenomenal job.
Thank you, Denise. I just hope that I taught something to somebody. So.
Oh, absolutely.
It was great.
You did, and more people when we get this online.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Good night, everyone.
See you
Bye.
all.
Denise, I've
Yes.
had some people asking that they weren't able to attend tonight, but they want to know the website. I don't know how you're going to tell it to people who didn't attend. Once you get the link up, they want to, I'll send you his email and you can answer him directly.
Okay, and if you, when we're all done with everything, if you want, if we can send that to you and you can send the link out to everybody with, just
The whole
telling.
list. Yeah.
For those who
Put it
missed.
up on the Facebook groups too, the quarantine
Right.
choirs and things like that. Might reach people. Okay.
Yeah,
It's
we
nice to
can
see
do
you,
that.
Vicky.
Vicki.
I'll look at the beginning, Dan.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. God, thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Nancy, for next week.
Bye. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night, all.